Welcome to the fields where the singing never stopped. St. Helena Parish, Louisiana, 1870. The war had ended 5 years earlier, but some voices never learned how to rest. They say the first time you hear it, you think it's the wind. A hum that drifts through the rows just before dawn, soft rising, almost gentle. But listen longer, and it shapes itself into words. Old spirituals half remembered, verses no one teaches anymore, songs about crossing water, about chains, breaking about home. And somewhere in the rhythm, the breath between the notes, you feel it, someone is still singing. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're listening from and what time of night it is right now. Because this isn't just a story about ghosts in the fields. It's about the voices that refuse to fade, even when the land tried to forget them. In the summer of 1870, the cotton still grew high across St. Helena Parish. Most of the hands who worked these rows had once been enslaved here, and after emancipation, they stayed. They built cabins from pine, patched the roofs with burlap, prayed beneath the same live oaks that had watched them labor for generations. But as freedom settled over the South, so did silence and unease. The soil held too many memories, too many bodies buried without name. They said the earth itself hummed when night came, that if you pressed your ear against the ground, you could hear the work songs still echoing beneath the roots. The old men in the quarters warned the children, don't answer the singing, because sometimes, when you followed the sound, you didn't come back. One evening, a woman named Evelyn Turner walked those rows alone. She carried an oil lantern and a hymn book missing half its pages. She said she was looking for her mother, lost during the winter of 1863, the year the Union soldiers came through. The night was hot, the fog low, the frogs loud enough to mask her steps. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a melody rose, slow, aching, familiar. Her mother's voice, or something like it. Neighbors would later say they saw her light drift between the rows, pause near the old baptism pond, then vanish. By morning, her footprints ended at the edge of the field. Only the lantern remained still burning, wick-low flame, steady as a heartbeat. The sheriff wrote one line in his ledger, "Colored woman missing, presumed drowned." But the congregation at Mount Olive Chapel refused to believe it. They said Evelyn wasn't gone, she'd been taken back into the song. And from that night forward, the singing changed. It grew louder when storms came. Sometimes it echoed from both ends of the valley, as if the whole earth were calling and answering itself. In the years that followed, field workers left tools, half-buried rows unfinished. Families moved north, chasing work and safety. But every harvest season, travelers passing through St. Helena swore they heard it again. A woman's voice threading through the cotton, repeating the same refrain, a lullaby without end. No one ever wrote the lyrics down. They said if you could remember them, you'd be bound to the fields forever. And so the story became a warning, a whisper shared in the cabins, then in the churches, then in the towns. Don't follow the singing, no matter how sweet it sounds, no matter who you think is calling your name. Tonight we open the ledger of 1870 and read between the lines that history forgot. The case of Evelyn Turner was never solved. Her name appears once in fading ink, then disappears from every record after. But the songs, the ones they said were hers, still surface in oral recordings made decades later by the WPA field agents. Voices trembling on acetate discs, women humming into tin funnels, men tapping their feet on dirt floors, each note carrying the same ghost of a melody. If you listen closely, through the hiss of time, through the scratches of the record, you can still hear her hum the first line. And somewhere behind it 1,000 more join in the forgotten souls of St. Helena Parish, keeping time with the wind. Because some songs were never meant to end, and some fields were never truly silent. St. Helena Parish, a small crease on the map of Louisiana, surrounded by pine, by river fog, by the faint hum of summer insects that never truly sleep. It doesn't boast the grand plantation houses you see on travel posters. No marble steps, no columns, only fields, rough red clay, and cabins that lean with age. By 1870, the war was over, yet nothing about this land felt new. The air still tasted of gunpowder and cane ash. The people still woke before dawn, hands rough from the same work that had once been called slavery. Freedom had come, at least that's what the papers said. But the soil seemed unsure. It remembered too much. Every furrow a grave. Every rainfall a baptism of memory. They say you can't walk 10 steps in St. Helena without stepping on history. And maybe that's why, when night falls, the ground itself begins to sing. After the war, the Freedmen's Bureau sent men south with ledgers and stamps to register marriages, to record births, to assign rations. They came on mules sweating through their uniforms, riding by lantern light in the back rooms of courthouses half burned by years of fighting. Their reports read like the minutes of a ghost story. August 3rd, singing heard in lower fields. No cause found. October 11th, woman claimed voice of deceased mother calling her by name. Recommend investigation, none conducted. The Bureau called these incidents of superstition. The freed people called them reminders, because for them the songs weren't simply sound, they were memory breath turned to proof. Cotton had returned quickly. By the summer of 70, wagons again lined the parish roads loaded with white bales and dust. But this time the hands that lifted them were free, at least on paper. The contracts were cruel, the debts endless. Sharecropping bound families to the same land with ink instead of iron. Still the people sang. At night you could hear them from miles away, call and response drifting through the pine. Sometimes a solo voice began low, almost like prayer. Another answered from the dark. Soon dozens joined, stamping feet, clapping hands, building rhythm from dirt. The songs rose, curved, fell, then ended not with silence, but with breath, a hush so deep it felt alive. Outsiders said it was haunting. The singers said it was deliverance. And somewhere in that echo between praise and pain, something else began to stir. The parish courthouse, rebuilt after the war, stood like a promise against the horizon. Brick red proud, its clock forever, 5 minutes slow. Inside, clerks cataloged the new world names written for the first time, families joined by law schools, proposed but not built. On the bottom of one page, almost hidden under an ink blot, a note in smaller script, unusual humming reported near section 14 after curfew. No signature, no follow-up. History left it there. Half forgotten, half afraid to ask more. Sunday mornings, the road to Mount Olive Chapel filled with sound boots on dirt, children laughing Bibles wrapped in cloth. The building itself was nothing but pine boards and faith. Inside, light fell through cracks in the wall, cutting the dust into thin gold lines. Reverend Samuel Barton stood at the pulpit, voice deep and steady, preaching Exodus again and again, the crossing, the waiting, the promise. He said freedom was not a gate that opened once it was a path that must be walked every day. His congregation nodded, eyes closed, humming softly in agreement. That hum, gentle at first, grew into song, a river of sound rising through the rafters, spilling out into the fields. Neighbors miles away could hear it, and sometimes answered with their own. That's how the parish learned to breathe again through music. But the line between the living and the lost was thin, and the songs didn't always belong to the living. Old men remembered the winter of 1863, the year soldiers passed through, and the river rose high enough to take the cabins. They said that was when the first voice began, a woman's voice singing to find her child. Each generation since has claimed to hear her again. Sometimes near the baptism pond. Sometimes in the rows of cotton after rain. Children were told never to answer, never to hum along, because if you do, their grandmothers whispered she'll think you belong to her, and she'll take you with her when she leaves. In a field journal from 1870, an overseer turned sharecropper described one night's harvest. At 9:30, the singing began again. Workers laid down tools, couldn't see where it came from. Sounded like wind, then voices, then nothing. One lantern lost. He never wrote another entry. By midsummer, St. Helena glowed under relentless heat. Cicadas screamed through the days. Lightning bugs replaced them by dusk. The smell of sap and sweat hung over everything. Families gathered on porches, fanning themselves with scraps of newspaper. The talk was always the same crops weather, and the singing. Some swore it was thunder caught in the trees. Others said it was the breath of God moving through. But everyone agreed on one thing. It happened most often on nights when the moon was half gone, and always near the place where Evelyn Turner had vanished. You can still find the old cabin foundations there, stones half-buried, moss thick between them. Local school children stumble across buttons, nails, shards of porcelain, all the relics time refused to bury. When historians came to photograph the site in the 1930s, their field notes mention an odd interference in the audio recorder, a low hum as though someone were singing beneath the surface. They dismissed it as mechanical error. The locals just nodded and told them to pack up before dark, because in St. Helena, sundown was never just the end of a day. It was when the parish remembered. The air changes, first thicker, stiller, then the light. The color drains from the fields until only red-brown remains the hue of dried blood and clay. Crows scatter, the frogs go silent. Somewhere a bell tolls once long after service has ended, and from beyond the last row a voice begins, soft, low, wordless at first, then rising into melody. It is never quite the same song. Sometimes it's a hymn, sometimes a lullaby, but always the same refrain, longing, endless, unfinished. Those who still live there say the song follows the wind. It moves from farm to farm, from generation to generation, a chorus without bodies, a promise without peace. It hums through open windows, wraps around sleeping children, curls inside the hollows of old trees. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear footsteps in the grass between the verses. Some claim it's only memory vibrations carried by the shape of the land echoes of centuries of voices bent in labor. But others believe the fields themselves are alive, that they hold the breath of everyone who ever sang within them, and that every few years, when the humidity hangs just right, those breaths rise again, reminding the living what the dead already know. Modern visitors call it folklore. The elders call it truth. And between the two lies the story we now follow, the one that begins with a single missing woman and unfolds into the oldest question the South has ever asked. When the work is done, do the voices finally rest? Tonight, as you listen wherever you are, imagine the field beneath your feet. Imagine the red clay turning darker, the air holding its breath, and that faint hum beginning somewhere far off. It may be just the wind, or it may be the land remembering. Either way, this is where our story truly begins. St. Helena Parish, Louisiana, 1870. In the archives of Baton Rouge, there is a box no one checks out anymore. Its label has peeled away, ink faded to the color of old rain. Inside, loose sheets, carbon copies, and one small notebook bound with string. Across its cover, in the careful hand of a bureau clerk, 4 words remain legible. Report St. Helena Parish, 1870. When you open it, the smell of mildew and iron rises first. Then the weight of paper too damp with history to turn quickly. Every page is a ghost. The first entry reads, April 9th. 2 sharecropper families report hearing hymns at midnight. No singers found, no residents missing. Advise them to keep lamps lit. The handwriting is steady, matter-of-fact, yet the margins tell a different story. Tiny dots of candle wax mark the edge, as if the writer had stayed up late listening. Further down, a note, in a different ink. Field number 9, same singing, multiple witnesses. Voice is feminine. Song resembles swing low. Wind direction inconsistent. Then, nothing. No conclusion. Just the word pending scratched out. Historians say such reports were common Negro superstition, the ledgers called it. But in St. Helena, superstition and testimony blurred. The same families who spoke to the Bureau also spoke to the church. And the church kept its own record, not in ink but in song. The Mount Olive Chapel Register, 1869 to 1873, lists the living and the lost. Each column ends with a strange annotation taken by the voice. No explanation, no location, only the year. 17 names in total. Folklore would later fill the silence between those lines. They said the voice belonged to a woman who once led the field hymns, Evelyn Turner's mother, the one who vanished during the occupation winter. Her song, they believed, was a bridge between worlds, calling every soul left behind to follow. During the 1930s, WPA Oral History Project, an old man named Isaiah Cole, gave his testimony to a field recorder. They told me, keep my ears down when the wind come cross that field. 'Cause that ain't no wind. That Miss Turner trying to find her young one. If you hear her first, you safe. But if she hear you first, you gone. The interviewer laughed nervously. The microphone hissed, and Isaiah's next words slipped almost to a whisper. Sometimes I think she's still singing the machines. When them pickers start to hum, and ain't nobody touch 'em that her. Still workin', still callin'. The tape clicks, then ends. Newspapers of the period give us the other version, the official one. The Greensburg Ledger, August 1870. Local freed laborers claim to be haunted by phantom music emanating from fields. Officials blame night insects and religious fervor. One woman, E. Turner, missing for 3 days. Search abandoned due to rain. No follow-up issue ever printed. The next week's edition covered only cotton prices and a sermon on temperance. But the people remembered. They told it differently, not as a headline, but as a caution. Each retelling smoothed the edges, reshaped the truth until it sounded like a hymn itself. The tale always began the same way. A woman alone in the field. A voice from the mist, a light that flickers and moves. Some say she answered. Others say she only listened. Either way, the night took her. And the next dawn, the cotton seemed whiter than ever, as if bleached by grief. Bureau reports from neighboring parishes show similar notes that year songs in the fog, no visible source. In one file from Tangipahoa County, a surveyor sketches the shape of a sound wave, labeling it unknown frequency. Beside it, a crude drawing of a lantern and a circle of footprints ending nowhere. When cross-referenced with St. Helena's ledger, the dates align perfectly. June, July, August. The same nights, the same moon. Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidence in folklore is just another word for pattern. A letter preserved in the Louisiana Historical Society complicates things further. Dated 1871, signed by Reverend Barton. The people are afraid to harvest at night. They say the fields sing. I have walked them myself. I heard nothing, and yet I felt watched. If this is Satan's work, then he has a gentle voice. A year later, the Reverend left the parish. His replacement never mentioned the singing again. Folklore layer takes those scattered entries and turns them into ritual. In local oral tradition, the song was not a curse, but a test. If you listened with a clean heart, you heard comfort. If you listened with guilt, you heard your own judgment. Elders spoke of nights when the sound moved through the quarters like smoke weaving between beds, lifting curtains. Babies stopped crying. Dogs howled once, then fell silent. No one dared to speak until morning. One woman remembered the morning after such a night. The rows looked taller. We found footprints on top the cotton. Ain't no man could step that soft. Some modern scholars argue that the sound was natural, the effect of wind moving through cotton pods like reeds. Acoustics made holy by fear. But the pattern is too precise, always between harvest and rain, always near the baptism pond where the Turner family lived. An 1895 geological survey mentions an odd phenomenon: iron deposits beneath that field creating low frequencies when wind pressure changes. A scientific explanation, perhaps? Yet those who grew up there swear that when you hear it, it forms words. Not many, just one name: Evelyn. What we know for fact: the Freedmen's Bureau ledger lists Evelyn Turner as missing, believed deceased. What we cannot prove that her voice became the song the parish still hears. Yet oral history is its own kind of evidence. The words may change, but the cadence remains. Each generation retells it with the same breath pattern, the same pauses between lines, almost as if the story itself was meant to be sung. In the 1936 recording archives of the Library of Congress catalog number AFS 23-1 and scene, a woman identified only as Martha B. sings a fragment collected in St. Helena. Don't you walk when the night is singin', don't you answer when it call, 'cause the Lord done freed your body, but the field still owns your soul. The recording lasts 47 seconds. At the end, a static crackle, then a low hum not produced by her voice. Technicians marked it as equipment fault. Locals call it Evelyn's reply. Fact meets folklore again in 1938, when a federal survey team mapping soil composition set up camp near the old Turner property. Their journal notes: strange choral effect after 9 p.m. No birds, no insects. Sound seems to emanate from the ground. They returned to Baton Rouge and never filed the acoustic data. There is a phrase the people of St. Helena still use: the land remembers its own voice. To them, Evelyn was not a ghost. She was memory made audible. Each note a record of what the books refused to keep. Listen closely to those archival records. You can almost hear the two layers align, fact and folklore, singing in unison. The official reports speak of missing persons. The spirituals speak of homegoing. Different words, same meaning. One written to be forgotten, the other written to survive. Late one evening, decades after the disappearances, a traveling preacher stopped in St. Helena and recorded in his diary, "I heard them before I saw them." Voices like honey and smoke, not loud, not near. They rose from the earth like steam. When I asked who was singing, the old man beside me said, "Ain't whose son is when?" So what do we call this? History, faith, physics, memory? Maybe all of them braided together like the rows of cotton themselves. Because every time we read a record, we create an echo. And every echo is a form of singing. The files say Evelyn Turner disappeared in August 1870. The people say she never left. Both can be true. In a way, the Freedmen's Bureau notebook and the folk songs serve the same purpose they try to name the unnameable. One in ink, the other in sound, both still bleeding through time. When you stand in those fields today, just as the light falls and the first crickets begin to stutter, you might feel the air shift. A vibration, low, steady, familiar. You might mistake it for wind. But if you listen a little longer, the wind starts to carry words. Evelyn, come home. And somewhere in a box in Baton Rouge, ink still wet beneath a century of dust, the final entry in the St. Helena file waits. One sentence. No signature, no date. Just this: voices heard again. Advise no further investigation. The ledger closes with a snap, like a door shutting against a storm. And the field keeps singing. Because some truths never needed proof, only a voice willing to listen. It began with footprints. Tiny, perfect, pressed into the damp clay, each step half filled with rain. The morning crew found them at first light, running straight through the cotton rows and stopping at the pond. No return path, no signs of struggle, just the smell of wet earth and the faintest hum still hanging in the air. By noon, the whole parish had heard. Another one gone, they whispered, though no one could name who. The fields were full of voices, but one fewer face always seemed to be among them the next day. Sometimes a hat left behind, sometimes a pair of shoes, Sometimes, nothing at all. The Freedmen's Bureau didn't send anyone this time. Their last visit had ended with their horse bolting from the fence line, terrified by what the officer described as a sound too low for wind. So the parish learned to handle disappearances themselves. They gathered at dusk, forming search lines with lanterns. Men on one side, women on the other, walking row by row until the fog forced them home. Each time the same ritual. Each time the same result. Nothing, except once. Maggie. In late September, a young boy named Thomas Leary ran to his mother's cabin crying that he'd seen the singing woman. He said she was standing in the field half hidden by the stalks, her face pale in the lantern light. She didn't move, but her mouth did. When his mother followed him outside, the night was empty again. The rose still, the pond quiet, the air heavy with the smell of burnt oil. They found Thomas the next morning asleep near the fence line, unharmed but humming. A tune no one recognized. That's when people began to speak of the answer. Because after Thomas's story, the singing didn't just come from the fields anymore. It came from the houses, from under doors, from wells, from the cracks in the walls where light bled through. A call and an answer. As if the parish itself was learning to reply. The first documented night of answer appears in a parish log dated October 3rd, 1870. The entry, written in hasty script, voices from two directions, east and west fields overlapping. Workers refuse night duty. Dogs restless. No explanation found. 1 week later, another entry. Singing continued until sunrise. Witnesses describe harmony of male and female tones. Multiple lanterns seen moving without handlers. The sheriff's report lists only 2 words: mass hysteria. But hysteria doesn't leave burn marks. And yet the lanterns they found the next morning were melted glass fused like wax. The metal handles twisted, as if gripped by heat that had no fire. Neighbors buried the remains of those lanterns behind the chapel, marking the spot with 3 stones. They called it the place where light stood still. By the end of harvest, the pattern deepened. Always the same sequence, a song at dusk, a pause, an echo hours later, softer but closer. Sometimes the second voice repeated the first. Other times it changed the tune entirely, almost correcting it. People began sleeping in groups, fearing the dark between verses. They said the dead were learning to speak through the cotton using sound, the way roots use soil. Every hum a thread, every echo, another name reclaimed from the dust. One of the last surviving accounts comes from Ezekiel Granger, written decades later in a trembling hand. "We was 6 men out in the north field cutting stalks for winter. Wind went dead still. Then come that low moan, like breath in a bottle. We looked up, and the mist was turning slow like it was walking. I say to the others, don't follow it. But Ben, he say, he hear his mama calling. He took 3 steps and was gone. Not run, not fall, just gone like air took him. When they found Ben's hat 2 days later, it was lying on the water perfectly dry. For the next month, the singing became nightly. The elders said it always started from the Turner field, that cursed patch of land between the creek and the ridge. Some claimed they saw shapes moving when the moon rose. Others swore they heard tools, clinking hose scythes, the rhythm of unseen labor, as if the ghosts had returned to finish what the living left undone. The pattern spread from parish to parish. A teacher in Amite wrote that his class refused to walk home after sunset. A priest in Baton Rouge reported a woman collapsing during service when the choir struck a certain chord. Even the telegraph operators complained of interference, a hum so steady it drowned the clicks. Folklore grew around each story. Some said the singing came from those who'd died unbaptized. Others said it was the land demanding confession, one note for every lie told about freedom. Children were taught to cover their ears when the wind rose to hum louder than the ghosts. And still every generation lost someone to curiosity. Late one autumn night, as thunder gathered beyond the hills, Reverend Barton's old bell began to ring, though the rope had long been cut. Witnesses said it sounded like laughter at first, then grief. The tone echoed across the parish until the fields themselves seemed to vibrate. When it stopped, everything did. Crickets, owls, even breath. That silence lasted 13 minutes. And when the sound returned, it was the hymn again. Soft, collective, like hundreds of voices beneath the ground, singing up through the roots. In one account, preserved by the Louisiana State University Folklore Project, an elderly woman named Clara Duval described that night. The air had a color to it, red like rust. My husband gone to check the animals, but I know better. I hear that song coming up from the well, same as the one they sing in church, but slow, real slow. I drop my bucket, run inside, shut the door. But the floorboards humming right under my feet, humming like somebody knocking from underneath. Clara left St. Helena the next morning. She never returned. And the 1870 census notes an unexplained population decrease, small but noticeable. 17 missing persons, all listed as moved north. No forwarding addresses, no relatives confirming departure, no new arrivals up north. Just absence disguised as migration. In Reconstruction era Louisiana, vanishing was easy. But in St. Helena, disappearance had a sound. By the following spring, the parish had become quiet again. Too quiet. No more songs from the chapel, no gatherings after dusk. Even the children stopped humming in play. It was as if silence had finally won. But silence, like everything here, doesn't last. On the first anniversary of Evelyn Turner's disappearance, a traveler passing through Greensburg wrote in his diary, stopped near parish line to rest horse. Heard low chorus of women singing from beyond the hill. Words indistinct, no houses visible. Horse refused to move until song ceased. He underlined one sentence twice. Sound came from both sides of the road at once. The pattern, the call, and the answer would repeat every decade or so. 1900, 1910, 1922. Each time fewer witnesses, but the same melody. Slightly altered by time, as though learning to breathe again. By the 1930s, the song had traveled from field to record, captured unintentionally by field workers recording work chants. When replayed, a second lower voice could be heard beneath the singer one, that no one remembered being present. Technicians tried isolating the frequencies. The hum remained, always tuned to the same key, always pulsing, like heartbeat. Modern folklorists call it the St. Helena phenomenon. They compare it to the Taos hum, to infrasound anomalies, to wind resonance. But no equation explains why it rises only during the harvest months, why it carries melody, why it knows the names. In interviews conducted as late as 1962, descendants of the parish workers recounted family warnings. Don't work the field on moonless nights. If you hear your own name sung, drop your tools and run. And one more, if the song stops before the dawn, somebody's spirit been set free. Every record, every retelling builds toward a question the Bureau never asked. What if the singing was never a haunting at all? What if it was memory itself, refusing to die quietly? Maybe the land was keeping score. Maybe those 17 names in the chapel ledger were simply being called home, one note at a time. When you stand in St. Helena Parish today, the air still moves that way, slow, circular, patient. The wind bends the cotton rows into waves. Some nights, microphones still pick up a hum the equipment can't trace. You can call it resonance, myth, coincidence, but if you close your eyes, if you let the night settle behind your ribs, you'll feel it vibrate there too. A rhythm older than any song, a memory older than any name, and when it finally fades, you'll find yourself whispering the only rule this parish ever kept. Don't follow the singing, because every time someone does the fields, remember how to sing again. The official record always tries to sound certain. Dates, signatures, stamps pressed hard enough to scar the page. But certainty is just another way of hiding doubt, and in the archives of St. Helena, doubt is the loudest thing still breathing. If you look close beneath the ink, beneath the handwriting, the truth starts to hum. The reconstruction files of 1871 list St. Helena Parish as stabilized. Population 4,213. Freed households 608. Incidents of unrest none reported. But turn the page, and a separate ledger appears, unverified accounts. It reads like a confession disguised as a bureaucratic afterthought. Noise disturbances continue after curfew. Local population attributes to singing spirits. Recommends psychological assessment of freed laborers. Another line, faintly penciled. One officer reports hearing melody while transcribing report. Dismissed as fatigue. Then, silence. Beneath that report lies a folded page with a stain the color of rust. It's a letter from a Union chaplain stationed near Baton Rouge. Captain Elias Vance, dated June 1871. To whom it may concern, I was sent to St. Helena Parish to address rumors of ghostly singing and low morale among the freedmen. On the second evening, I too heard what they describe a harmonic tone without source or echo. It came from no instrument, no human throat. The sound seemed to move through the soil, not the air. Several men fell to their knees. I cannot account for what we witnessed. I have prayed, but the sound remains. At the bottom, in a hand not his own, filed but not forwarded. The letter never left Louisiana. And a year later, another file. A military engineer, this time surveying post-war damage to the telegraph lines near Greensburg. Night operations interrupted by continuous low-frequency tone. Equipment vibrated. Compass needles erratic. Men complained of music in their bones. No logical source. He labeled the report, anomalous auditory event. 3 words that turned living fear into a line item. But the people of St. Helena didn't need reports to tell them what they already knew. They'd been hearing the same hum long before the war, long before anyone thought to write it down. In the oral tradition, the legend deepened. The singing became not merely sound, but ceremony. A call and answer between this world and the next. Each voice in the field was believed to awaken one soul still waiting to be set free. Elders spoke of midnight crossings, small circles of people gathering by the baptism pond, whispering names into the mist. They would hum softly, never loud, as if afraid the dead might answer too soon. The ritual was not meant to summon, only to remember. But sometimes, remembering is enough to open the door. One story tells of a man who tried to record the hum by carving notches into wood, one for each beat. When morning came, he found the wood warped, twisted, as if something inside it had moved overnight. He burned it, and the next night, the singing stopped. For a week. Then came back twice as loud. The church records of Mount Olive Chapel confirm one detail of the folklore. In 1872, Reverend Barton's successor, Minister Charles Dunley, introduced a silent service. No singing, no instruments. Congregants were instructed to pray in stillness to avoid provoking what the Reverend called the unseen choir. Attendance dropped. Offerings dwindled. By 1873, the church had shuttered its doors. The same year, a local farmer found the chapel bell half buried in mud, a mile from its steeple, as if carried there by unseen hands. He sold the metal for scrap. 2 days later, his barn burned to the ground. The insurance claim lists lightning. But there was no storm that night. Fact and folklore, each trying to overwrite the other, yet neither surviving without its twin. The official record tells of reconstruction. The songs tell of resurrection. And somewhere between them, the truth hums quietly, steady as breath. In 1892, a traveling ethnomusicologist from New Orleans, Professor Jean-Baptiste Marigny, visited the parish to collect early spirituals. His notebook survives. One page reads, "Voices in harmony, one male, one female." Neither present when recording played back. Villagers call it the Turner tune. Words indecipherable, emotion profound. He left a phonograph cylinder marked SHP1. When it was transferred to tape in the 1950s, engineers noted an extra layer of sound, a low resonance beneath the song. Frequency analysis showed it pulsed exactly 60 beats per minute, human resting heartbeat. Some claim that's coincidence. Others call it evidence proof that the land itself is alive, still remembering the rhythm of those who worked it. A former field hand interviewed in 1937 said it best, "We sung to keep from dying." Maybe the land took our songs 'cause it pitied us. Maybe it still sing 'cause it miss us. Her voice cracks on the last word, miss. The tape crackles, hums, then bleeds into static. But even through the noise, you can still hear her inhale before the machine clicks off. The spirituals of St. Helena never made it into hymnals. Too slow, too sorrowful. They weren't about salvation. They were about staying. Lines repeated until meaning fell away, leaving only feeling. Home water, rise, sleep. Words like stones thrown into a pond, rippling outward. Modern folklorists call them residual chants. But the parish calls them evidence, because every time one of those songs is sung aloud, something answers. A door creaks. A gust moves through the rafters. The temperature drops. And for a heartbeat, the air feels inhabited. In 1941, during a Works Progress Administration field study, researchers recorded a choir of elderly parishioners performing a piece titled "The Way of the Voice." Halfway through, one singer falters, eyes wide, voice trembling. When asked what happened, she says quietly, "I heard her." Who the interviewer asks, "Miss Evelyn?" Standing behind me, singing the second part. They checked the room. No one there. But the tape caught it. A faint harmony 2 notes lower, weaving through the verse like smoke. It's still there if you listen, a ghost duet pressed into acetate. Scholars analyzing the recordings decades later note an anomaly. The second voice is pitched precisely 12 Hz lower than human female range. An impossible note. Yet the waveform is stable, deliberate, melodic. When isolated, it forms a phrase in Old Creole, "Pa quitte mwen, pou compte mwen." Don't leave me alone. The line repeats 5 times, then fades beneath the choir. Some think it's interference. Others think it's a message not to the living, but to the other side. A song between worlds. That's how folklore works here. It doesn't die, it adapts. The same song that once warned, "Don't follow the singing," became, over time, a prayer for reunion. Children born generations later hummed it without knowing why. Women sang it in the fields during storms, asking protection from what they couldn't see. And sometimes, they swore the wind hummed back. In 1968, a local teacher interviewed one of her elderly students for a class project. He said he could still hear the voices when he passed the Turner land. She asked if it frightened him. He shook his head. "No, ma'am. That's just them checking the rows. Fact or faith, take your pick." But something in those rows still listens. Even now, farmers report radio static rising near the old pond. Microphones humming during harvest broadcasts, dogs refusing to cross the fence after sundown. And the pattern, still the same. A song, a pause, an echo. In one modern survey using vibration sensors, researchers found low-frequency pulses beneath the soil corresponding to the rhythm of a human hymn. They called it ground resonance anomaly. Locals called it company, because to them, the dead were never gone, just quieter, waiting for someone to sing first. Every attempt to explain the phenomenon ends the same way: a missing line, a blank page, a phrase cut short. Maybe the bureau officers got tired. Maybe the preachers lost faith. Or maybe some truths can only be sung, never written. And in the stillness of those cotton fields where the air moves like breath, and the soil hums like a body, remembering, you begin to understand. It was never about ghosts. It was about memory. Memory so deep, it turned to music. The fields hum still. The church stands empty. But when the wind slides through the cracks in its boards, the sound that escapes is unmistakable. A single sustained note, pure, fragile, alive. And if you listen closely, you might hear the words beneath it, carried in rhythm with your own heart. Don't follow the singing unless you remember the way home. Because here in St. Helena Parish, the line between prayer and haunting has always been the same line that runs between rows of cotton, straight, endless, and trembling with the voices that refuse to rest. They say every haunting begins with a document, a page torn from time too fragile to touch, too dangerous to forget. For St. Helena Parish, that page was almost lost. Almost. It surfaced in 1974, a single sheet folded into the back of a property deed, recovered from a courthouse restoration box. No signature, no title, only a line at the top in fading graphite transcription of Night Sound, 1870. Beneath it, a series of notations drawn in long horizontal strokes, curving like a melody line. Next to each curve, a word. Not in English, in a language between Creole and something older. One phrase repeats, "Muen tande yonko." I hear them again. And at the bottom, one English sentence, "She sings where the earth breathes." No one knows who wrote it. But the handwriting matches the bureau clerk's from the original 1870 ledger. For nearly a century, it sat unnoticed until a graduate researcher named Helena Parish cataloged the file while studying postbellum auditory folklore. She was 26, meticulous, unafraid of ghosts. At least not yet. In her notes dated October 1975, she describes finding unlabeled phonograph cylinders stored in a wooden crate marked SHP. The same initials as Marini's recordings, the ethnomusicologist from 1892. There were 4 cylinders in total. 3 broken, 1 intact. She labeled it SHP4 Turner Field, Night Song, and on a humid afternoon she placed it on a playback machine at Tulane University's Sound Lab. What she heard changed everything. At first it was static. A hiss, a pop, the ordinary decay of wax and time. Then beneath it, a hum, faint rhythmic pulsing. 60 beats per minute, heart tempo. She wrote, low tone audible below male register. Second layer enters female higher sustained. Melody incomplete, resolving downward every 4th bar. Words indistinct, possibly name. She listened again, turned up the gain. And there it was, a breath between notes, then a whisper. "Evelyn?" The voice spoke it softly, as though answering someone. Helena froze. She replayed the segment 3 seconds long, each time the same. No distortion, no echo, just one word spoken through a century of dust. "Evelyn." She played it again that night alone. And as the recording reached its midpoint, another sound emerged low, almost imperceptible. A harmony that wasn't supposed to be there. Helena described it as a second presence joining in, matching the first voice note for note. But when she ran the waveform through spectrographic analysis, she found something impossible. The second voice mirrored her own frequency response. Her own. Her supervisor dismissed it as playback feedback, the machine picking up resonance from her body, translating it through the needle. But in her final entry, Helena wrote, "If resonance equals recognition, maybe it's not the field remembering us. Maybe it's us remembering the field." She filed her report. 2 weeks later, she vanished. The university listed her as missing. The last person to see her said she was packing her car, planning to drive to St. Helena Parish to hear the real thing. Her car was found a mile from the Turner property, doors locked, keys inside, radio still on, tuned to static. For decades, the SHP4 recording was considered cursed, sealed in an archival vault in New Orleans. But in 1993, during digitization, a technician accidentally played it through a studio monitor instead of headphones. The waveform expanded. The hum grew louder, and the technician swore he heard whispering behind the tone. He described it as voices counting 1, 2, 3, then silence. Audio experts examined the file. They found faint fluctuations in amplitude, irregular organic-like breathing. At intervals, a pulse 80 cycles per minute. The rhythm of someone walking. They reclassified the file from music to anomalous human field recording. Yet when they overlaid it with Marini's 1892 wax cylinders, the frequencies aligned perfectly, over a century apart. Two different technologies, one same sound. Folklore and fact, finally touching. Modern descendants of the Turner family still living in Louisiana call the phenomenon the return. Each generation hears it differently. Some as comfort, some as warning. In their telling, the singing is a negotiation, a promise between the living and the buried. You remember us, we let you rest. And if that promise breaks, the song returns. One elder, Miss Lottie Mae Henderson, interviewed in 2004, said, "When that girl went missing, the one from the college, the field lit up again. Lanterns just like my granddaddy told it. I seen it with my own eyes, lights moving where ain't no road. And the hum, same as always." The hum. That's what ties every century together. The bureau files, the WPA tapes, the digital recordings, all with that same undertone, low, persistent, pulsing through time, like a heartbeat shared between worlds. And when researchers filtered it through modern software, they found a hidden layer beneath the audible range, an infrasound resonance coded like Morse. Not random, structured, repeating pattern. 4 dots, 2 dashes, 1 pause. Translated phonetically, it spells E. They stopped testing after that. But the pattern kept surfacing. In the soil sensors of 2011, faint electromagnetic spikes synchronized with the same key signature as the 1870 hymns. In the humidity monitors, static bursts timed to the rhythm of swing low. And just once, in a field recording made by a tourist with a phone walking near the pond. At 2:13 a.m., she captured a voice singing 4 words. Barely audible. Wind behind it, but clear. Don't follow the singing. Then silence. Her phone shut off. Battery full. Screen black. When she turned it back on, the date had changed 1 day forward. Science says there's an explanation for everything. But the longer you trace this story, the more explanations sound like hymns spoken to calm ourselves, not to reveal truth. Because what do you call a sound that keeps crossing centuries carrying names it shouldn't know? What do you call the echo that learns your own frequency and hums it back? A haunting or a memory that refuses to die? There's a moment when you listen to the SHP4 file in total darkness, when the hum begins to synchronize with your own pulse. Listeners describe dizziness. Some say the room feels smaller. Others say they smell smoke, not burning wood, but lantern oil. And then, a whisper, not from the speakers, from the walls. It begins soft, unintelligible, then gathers shape like breath-finding words. Where the river bends, the same line found on that damp sheet in Baton Rouge. I hear them call no chains, no dawn, no end at all. The song completes itself. After 100 years, it finally ends its refrain. But endings here never stay that way for long. Lena Carroll's tape remains sealed, her name etched on the metal case. Every few years, someone requests access. Every request is denied. The archive cites unverified contamination of recording surface. Unofficially, the curators say it still plays on its own sometimes. When the humidity rises, when the rain hits the roof just right. Staff have reported hearing footsteps in the listening room, always stopping near the machine, never moving past it. One intern swore she felt someone brush her shoulder, gentle, warm, almost human. Then, a hum. She quit the next day. But the legend of Evelyn Turner has changed shape again. To the parish elders, she's not a ghost, she's a guardian. Her song, a boundary between rest and unrest. When the tune rises, they say the dead are restless. When it fades, they've been remembered, each voice keeping the other in balance. the last living descendant of the Turners. Mrs. Ruth Delane, age 92, sits on her porch each evening with a battery radio. It hums when she turns it toward the field. She doesn't flinch. She hums along, slowly, softly. The same melody passed down through blood and soil. When asked why she smiled, "That's how we talk, baby. We don't follow the singing. We answer it." And that maybe is the secret the records never knew how to hold. The people of St. Helena were never haunted by their dead. They were in conversation with them. Freedom wasn't the end of bondage. It was the beginning of remembrance. And remembrance always hums. Because what the world calls ghosts, the parish calls family. If you stand there today near the Turner Pond where moss hangs like breath and the air tastes of iron, you'll hear it too. Not loud, not frightening, just a single tone threading through the silence. A song waiting for your voice to join it. And when you do, when your hum aligns with the rhythm beneath your feet, the field will answer. The hum will rise. The cotton will sway. And somewhere far beneath the soil, Evelyn Turner will open her mouth once more. To finish the note she began in 1870. And when the sound finally fades, you'll realize something simple, something devastating. The song was never calling her. It was calling us, because we are the ones who forgot. And the land never did. The hum returns each summer. The record waits in silence. And the cotton still remembers the tune. Morning comes slow in St. Helena Parish. The air sits heavy sweet with dew and memory. Somewhere a rooster calls distant hesitant, like it too has learned to wait for the silence to break first. And then faintly, the hum returns, not loud now. Just a shimmer in the wind, rising from soil still red with stories. To the locals, it's no longer a curse. It's a kind of clock. When the earth hums, they say it's remembering who it used to be. All time has stretched, blurred, folded upon itself. The Freedmen's Bureau is long gone. Its ledgers gather dust in the state archive, their paper edges brittle, their ink thin as smoke. The church has collapsed, its roof sunken, its bell melted into the clay that once held so many names. The Turner Pond lies still, ringed by cattails, thick with silence. And yet every so often a ripple moves across it, with no breeze, no stone, no cause. And when that happens, someone somewhere in the parish feels a chill that's half sorrow, half recognition. Because the story of the singing didn't end with Evelyn Turner. It became something else, a language between generations passed like breath from mother to child. In the 1980s, sociologists documenting post-slavery rural traditions interviewed dozens of black families across southern Louisiana. Almost all of them, when asked about hauntings, told the same phrase in slightly different words. The land got memory. The earth remembers the hands. The songs come back when you forget who worked here first. Their voices were calm, not fearful. To them, the haunting was never punishment. It was proof. Proof that what had been endured had also been recorded, not in ink, not in books, but in vibration, in sound, in the rhythm of wind, moving through cotton. Well, today a highway cuts across the old parish line, a long gray ribbon over ground that once shimmered white. Cars rush past the fields at 70 miles an hour, their engines roaring like modern hymns. And yet, if you roll down the window at dusk, just as the cicadas die down, you can still hear it. A tone, low, steady. Older than the engines, older than the road. Truck drivers talk about it. They say their radios flicker when they pass mile marker 19. Static rises, voices fade, then faintly a melody curls through the interference. Always the same pattern, a hum, a pause, a whisper. Don't follow. There's a museum now in Baton Rouge. Small, quiet, its walls lined with framed bureau documents and sepia photographs. In the far corner, under dim glass, sits the cylinder marked SHP4. The label has peeled again. Only 2 letters remain visible. E.T. Visitors don't linger near it. Audio playback has been disabled for preservation, but curators admit that sometimes when the air conditioning cuts off at night, the glass fogs from the inside, as if something in there is breathing. A new generation of historians has begun calling this story a spiritual continuity narrative. They study the folklore not for ghosts, but for evidence of how trauma becomes sound. They say the singing fields of St. Helena aren't supernatural. They're psychological imprints born from collective memory, layered over time, until they hum. Maybe they're right. But even the most rational among them fall quiet when the tape plays that faint hum looping under the recorded voices of the past, pulsing in time with their own heartbeat. Because logic fades where resonance begins. Miss Ruth Delane. The last Turner descendant passed away in 2008. Her radio was still humming when the neighbors found her. The dial fixed to static. Her lips parted as if mid-verse. On her nightstand lay a note handwritten in neat cursive. If they start singing again, don't hush them. Just listen. It's how they come home. The house has since fallen quiet, but the radio stored in a local exhibit still crackles faintly when the lights dim. No power, no wires, just the faint rhythm of something old, refusing to stop. In 2015, a sound engineer from New Orleans tested the soil near the Turner site with ground microphones. He expected nothing. What he found were bursts of infrasound, every 22 minutes, vibrations too low for the ear, but visible on a spectrum. When converted to audio frequency and sped up, the pattern became melodic, almost human. And when he played it through speakers, a local woman listening nearby began to cry. She said she recognized the tune. Her grandmother used to hum it while braiding her hair. He shut the machine off. The field stayed humming. No one calls it haunting anymore. The younger generations call it heritage. During the summer, church groups hold gatherings by the pond, not to chase ghosts, but to sing the old songs again. They light candles, read the names from the chapel register, and hum until the crickets answer. It isn't performance. It's remembrance. Each verse is a bridge. Each hum a heartbeat extended across centuries. When the voices rise together, soft, layered, steady, the air shifts. Lanterns flicker. The pond stirs. And for a moment, the sound that returns feels less like echo and more like recognition. Like a voice saying, "You remembered." Some nights, documentary crews come, cameras, drones, microphones. They capture fog rolling over the rows, lights hovering just above the soil. On playback, the footage glitches colors, drain time, jumps, the hum grows louder. One cameraman described it best. It wasn't the field moving. It was the air around it breathing. They leave before midnight. Everyone does. Because no matter how many studies, how many articles, how many explanations, when the singing begins, the instinct to stay and the instinct to run are the same thing. The story of St. Helena Parish has become more than folklore. It's a mirror held to the South itself. A reminder that freedom isn't silence. It's the right to keep speaking, even after the world stops listening. The people who sang in those fields weren't calling for help, they were marking proof of life. Their voices said, "We were here." And the hum that remains is the world's reply, "We remember." If you drive through Louisiana on a foggy night, and your headlights catch the shimmer of cotton dust drifting above the ground, slow down. Roll down your window. Turn off the radio. You might hear it faint at first, then clearer, a song without words, circling the earth in endless refrain. Somewhere beneath that sound, a woman's voice still hums the name of the place she loved. Not to haunt it, but to hold it together. The story of the forgotten souls of St. Helena Parish never had an ending. Only a rhythm that outlived the bodies who began it. A pulse that crossed generations, disguising itself as silence, until someone remembered to listen again. So when you finish this story, when the screen fades to black and the hum begins to fade from your speakers, remember this? Every field has its memory, every name its echo, every song its unfinished verse. Maybe that's why some voices never stop. Because they're not waiting for the living to join them. They're waiting for us to listen long enough to understand what they were trying to say. The field isn't haunted. It's awake. It's remembering. And every whisper of wind through the cotton is another name, rising from the dirt to meet the air. You've just heard a record from history that never truly closed. The fields still sing. The soil still hums. And somewhere in that sound, Evelyn Turner breathes again. Before we go, leave a comment where you're listening from and what you felt when the singing reached you. Because tonight, you're part of the record now. Don't follow the singing, just listen. Because that's all the forgotten ever asked for.